Alumni webinar, Executive Spirit Presence, what is it and how to gain it? As we move through the webinar, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. We will be scanning those and taking questions as time allows. And after the webinar is over, Dr. White and I will look over the questions and gather some of them together and perhaps respond to some of you in an email or other format after the fact. So it is now my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Ken White. He is our new Associate Dean for MBA Executive Programs here at the Raymond A. Mason School of Business. And in addition to his leadership role, he teaches communication to students in the MBA program and to corporate audiences in the Mason School's Career for Corporate Education. Ken has over 25 years' experience in communication. He is an award-winning television sports anchor and radio play-by-play announcer before moving to higher education, where he served as a Chief Communications Officer. Before joining the Mason School of Business and William & Mary, he was Vice President for Communications and Marketing at the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business and Associate Dean and Communication Professor at the University of Maryland's Robert H. Smith School of Business. Ken serves as a communications professor, teacher, and coach to undergraduate and graduate students, broadcasters, executives, Fortune 500 companies, not-for-profits, professionals, and associations of all types, levels, and sizes. And today, he's here to talk to you about a very important and hot topic, executive presence. Ken.
Eliza, thank you. And thank you. Greetings from Williamsburg, the College of William & Mary, and the Raymond A. Mason School of Business. Thank you for being with us today here on your lunch hour. We're pleased that you're spending some time with us today. You know, whether you want to improve your presence or whether you're coaching a team, maybe leading a team and helping others who would like to build their executive presence, this is an important topic, but really a hot topic. It seems everywhere I go, people are talking about executive presence. I think what it really boils down to is how you are perceived today is very important. You would think in the world of social media it might be the other way, but actually our perception, the way people see you, the vibe you send to others, the way you're perceived is very important. And when we talk about this, a lot of people sometimes tend to think it might just be the nature of the way we work today. You know, it's the economy. And the idea of spending 30 years of your entire career with one organization, you know, might be an idea of the past. And so we're all a bit of a free agent, so to speak. Each one of us is a free agent. And we all know, regardless of our role, regardless of your job, you're also selling pretty much all the time as well. So all of that leads to the importance of executive presence and how it is important for you and your career, those around you, those you lead, and those you know you're training. Let's get my picture off this and move right to the slide. There we go. These are some of the people I talk to, not only at the Mason School, and it's wonderful to work here because all of these various audiences are in here every day, but just as well when we're also outside talking to other clients, talking to businesses and working with them. Whether they're seasoned, young, corporate clients, students, it seems everybody wants to know about executive presence. What's interesting about the younger executives and the MBA students is they want to know now, how do I obtain this? I think in the old days, so to speak, executive presence meant you had to be a certain age, you had to have a certain title, had to have a certain office. And younger people today say, no, you know, I don't want to wait. So what is it? How do I learn how to do this? How can I obtain executive presence? And, you know, it's pretty easy. There are some very basic elements, and we'll talk about that today here in the next few minutes. So if you would, just think for a moment. Think of someone in your circle who possesses executive presence, someone you work with, someone in your professional circle. Who might that be? And now, with that person in mind, ask yourself, you know, why did you select that individual? What qualities does that individual possess? And why do you think they have executive presence? Sometimes we know what executive presence is. We can't quite identify the ingredients or the elements. But why? What makes them so special? What is it? What is it about them? I'm guessing that they possess these elements. These are the elements to executive presence. First is communication. It's difficult to have a real presence unless you're a high quality communicator. And in fact, of these 5 elements, communication is clearly the most important. And they're actually listed by importance. So communication, the great communicators seem to have executive presence. You can communicate all you want though, but unless you have some substance, that's incredibly necessary. You have to know what it is you're talking about. You have to have some expertise. Number 3 is appearance. And we'll talk about each of these bullets in detail as we go through our interaction today. Appearance is not necessarily what you think. It's not spending incredible amounts of money on a wardrobe. It's more about appropriate dress for where you work and your element, where you happen to conduct your business. Poise is number 4. How do you act when others might be struggling in the midst of a crisis or in a high-pressure situation? And finally, the 5th bullet point is your surroundings. That's a little bit different than the first 4, but your office, your workspace, some things that are outside of you actually send messages to others, and it can help you build your presence. So let's go through some of the elements, and let's start with clearly the most important element, and that is communication. It's very rare to see someone with executive presence who isn't a high-quality communicator. There was a marketing book written in the mid-'70s called Positioning, and if you're in marketing, you probably know the book. If you haven't read it, I just read it actually last summer again for probably the 10th time, and it still holds up today. It talks about positioning products. Is really the gist of the book. But there are a few pages dedicated to communication, and I've never found a better definition of communication than I did in positioning. And it says, with communication going for you, anything is possible. Without it, nothing is possible, no matter how talented and ambitious you may be. What's called luck is usually an outgrowth of successful communication, saying the right thing to the right person at the right time. And with the explosion of social media, and this was again written in the mid-'70s, way before any kind of social media, and in fact, that was about the year cable television started to come into play. This is way before all of the social media, but even today, this is so right on target. With communication going for you, anything is possible. We've seen it. We've seen the people in our organizations who get the promotions, they catch the breaks, they tend to be outstanding communicators. And it's certainly the top element of executive presence. And despite all of that social media, the way we work today, communication has become the business currency of today. And as I just happened to glance over at some of the questions that are coming in, the slides will be made available to you after the webinar for sure. We'll make sure that you receive the webinar and also a link to the recorded webinar. But communication is the business currency of today. Think of what you do. And it doesn't even matter what the field is anymore. I think in the old days, maybe we thought the sales folks had to be the ones who were outstanding communicators. Not the case today. If you want that executive presence, if you want a high quality personal brand, if you want people to see you in a professional light, you've got to be good at communication. So what is that? It's the way you interact with others. Most of us tend to think of bullet 2, right? Speaking, presenting, and delivering. But considering the audience we have with us today, our alumni, this is a professional group, we tend to forget that active listening is actually the most important. And executives often forget about that. And I think maybe it's because executives are always feeling as if, I have to have the answer. So when many executives or leaders are in conversations, rather than truly listening, what they sometimes are spending time doing is figuring out what they're going to say, what their response will be. And when we communicate like that, we're not actively listening. We're probably not even hearing. And we're forgetting about that other person or that audience. So communication is about active listening. Certainly it's about speaking, presenting, and delivering. And this is where most of those opportunities come. I tell our students, anytime you get any opportunity to stand up in front of a group and speak, take the opportunity and prepare for the opportunity. Don't wing it, because that is a great way for a young person to build their brand and to work on their executive presence. And when we talk about speaking, presenting, and delivery, there's two forms. There's verbal, what you actually say, that's your delivery, and then nonverbal. What do you do with your hands and your body while you are communicating? Good communicators are empathetic, right? They're aware of that other person, where the other person's coming from and what their needs are. And as we're all working today, we know cross-cultural sensitivity is huge. Just look around any meeting table you happen to have. There's several cultures represented. Now there's multi-generational issues at work, right? We have baby boomers who are being led by millennials in some instances. And we have to be aware of those differences. And the more we understand those differences, the better we can communicate. And all of this leads to how you are perceived. And hopefully that means you'll be perceived in a positive manner. So again, let's think for a moment, if you will. Who are the great communicators? Who do you think is a great communicator? Someone that we would all know, someone that everyone logged onto the webinar would say, oh yeah, that person is absolutely fantastic. Oh, I just got a great one. Someone just typed in, Catherine just typed in Richard Branson. David Hoyt beat me. He already has someone I've got in the slideshow. How about this one? Bill Clinton. You know, regardless of your political leanings, whatever you think, Republican, Democrat, this is one fantastic communicator. Absolutely fantastic. And if you think, you know, what makes him so great, we'll go back to the list. A great listener, can speak, present, deliver. It's got the verbal, the nonverbal, the empathy, and so on. I've got a couple folks who've already typed in Ronald Reagan. Absolutely. And what's interesting about Ronald Reagan, while Bill Clinton is known for face-to-face, being a great face-to-face communicator, Ronald Reagan understood media. And many people say, well, he was an actor. Of course, he understands the camera. But, you know, when he was a young man, he was a broadcaster, and he understood that microphone. And that's really what gave him that leg up in terms of communication. Some other fantastic nominations are being typed in from you. Jon Stewart, JFK, Winston Churchill, Pope Francis, Steve Jobs, Colin Powell, FDR. Absolutely, right? And if you go back to the list, all of those understood these and just truly mastered the things on that list. How about Oprah? Wow. When I was in my 20s, I worked in local television, and we would always be taught to try to strive to the point where your audience feels that there are no cameras there are no lights, that the anchor is having a discussion with that one audience member only. All right, it's just that one-on-one, and she has absolutely nailed that. And of course, none of us are Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, or Oprah Winfrey, but these are people we can learn from. Absolutely. I'm just looking at some of the comments you're typing in. Oprah definitely has executive presence. The William & Mary president, Taylor Reevely, has been nominated as an excellent communicator. Right. Again, look back at the list. Right. They listen. They know how to deliver. They've got the verbal, the nonverbal, the empathy, and so on. So the communication piece is absolutely gigantic. And the great ones know. Just think of those I've shown you and some of the names I shared that have been typed in. They know it's all about the audience. Young executives or inexperienced people who are learning about communication sometimes focus so much on themselves that they forget it's all about the audience. If you don't connect with the audience, it doesn't matter a whole lot, you know, what you do. Got another great recommendation. Mike Ryan said Lou Holtz, great communicator. Absolutely. So this is interesting. We all have our favorites. And if you think about it, it all goes back to that list. I mentioned earlier verbal and nonverbal. And verbal is especially important today. We were actually walking through our webinar the other day, Karen Connor, who's here in the studio, and Eliza Parrish and I. And Eliza said, you know, we spend so much time on conference calls and on the phone. How does someone have presence when we don't see them, right? How does someone come across on a conference call or on a telephone conversation? Well, verbal, that's the place to focus. your rate of speech, how quickly you speak or how slowly you speak. There's reams of research out there that tells us the slower one speaks, the more they are seen as a leader. And that makes sense. They sound thoughtful when they speak slowly. Pacing is about pauses. You've made your point, you pause, you move on to the next point, right? Volume is something. Do you speak too loudly or are you too soft? When we talk about verbal, and when I work with executives and some of our corporate partners through the Center for Corporate Education here at the Mason School, we do look very closely at patterns. Many of us have patterns when we speak in our verbal delivery. A very common pattern, especially among younger folks, is accidentally putting a question mark at the end of a sentence. Right? They mean to make a statement, but they put that question mark at the end, and it sounds as if they're questioning themselves and they're sabotaging their own credibility. Well, the rest of the folks on the phone call are going to feel about the same way if that's the case. Also, verbally, non-fluencies. Being aware of these is very critical. And non-fluencies are fillers. Words like like, My wife and I have 2 teenagers and a 20-year-old. And the 3 of them at the dinner table, it is a like fest. Every other word is like. And you just can't, and if you have teenagers, you know this, you can't help but laugh and crack up about it. They know, fortunately, that in a social setting, that's fine. If they're talking to a professor, if they're in a professional situation, they know those non-fluencies have to be put away. There are so many credibility studies done about the effects of non-fluencies. The more we use them, the less people see us as a credible source. That obviously will affect our executive presence, no doubt. And the key, especially to what Eliza was talking about the other day, about being on the phone and handling conference calls and trying to have presence in that setting, it's about inflection. The majority of the words we say are actually rather useless. About 20 to 30% of the words we use are important. And on that conference call, and when you're on the phone, it's knowing what words are important, what points are important, and making sure you drive those home. You hammer those home. And that's inflection. You may raise your volume. You may lower it. You may slow down. You may pause. There's all kinds of things. And it just changes your voice a little bit, so you hammer those words home. Just like that. That would be inflection. So verbally, especially when we were on the phone so much and doing conference calls, a huge ingredient to communication. And then, of course, face-to-face, nonverbal is very important. Your eye contact. What do you do with your hands, your posture? I was talking to one of our guests at the CCE, the Center for Corporate Education, a couple weeks ago in the hallway, and we were talking, and she suddenly clasped her hands together and said, "Oh, no, oh, no." And I said, "What?" And she said, "My family tells me I use my hands too much. And you're the communication guy, so I don't want to use my hands." And I said, "No, just the opposite. Use your hands. That's very helpful. If you don't use the eyes, the hands, your posture, your smile, your eyebrows, that's 50% or more of the communication capacity that you're cutting off." So being aware of what you do non-verbally, very important. There's a great point here. Someone types in Toastmasters is outstanding for curing those non-fluencies, the likes, ahs, the ums, as Peter wrote, those audible pauses. Great advice. It's our culture that tends to cause us to use non-fluencies, especially in the U.S. We don't like silence. In broadcasting, it's actually called dead air. It's the ultimate sin. So we try to fill that silence. And so I just did it. I just said, right? So you want to, instead of filling the silence, try to have the delivery that's smooth and that continues to move. So that's a heck of a lot on communication, but it's a huge ingredient and the most important ingredient in terms of executive presence. So number one is communication.
Ken, before you move on, there was a question which I think is kind of interesting and from John. Is there too much hand motion? How much hand motion movement is too much?
Yeah, John, great question. Absolutely. You don't want to look like you're trying to help an airplane land at the airport, right? Absolutely. It can be too much. And I think the person I was talking to a couple weeks ago, her family and friends have obviously felt what she does is too much. It actually does interfere. I think if you hear comments like that from those who care about you and your close colleagues, if they're joking about too much hand movement, they're probably right. It may be interfering with the rest of what you're trying to communicate. So try to be aware of that. The best way to know, do I use my hands too much, or do I do something physically that interferes with my communication, is to record yourself. And it doesn't have to be in a speech type setting. I mean, you can go in your kitchen and just set up your iPad and hit record and just talk for a couple of minutes. And when you watch that back and self-evaluate, it is absolutely amazing what you see. I've coached so many people over the years, but the first thing I tell them is, before you need me, try it yourself, because you're going to be tougher on yourself than I would be on you. So to answer the question, yes, there can be too much if it starts to interfere and you're hearing about that from other people. It could be a heck of a distraction.
One more before you move on, please. Lee Shaw, Berkeley Shaw, is an interesting question too, and that's about smiling too much, making you look passive or too eager. And I think that that's an interesting question. Sometimes does that diminish you and not give you the gravitas or not?
Yeah, I think we have to be, and actually I think I have that. I refer to that on the last slide. This all sounds so serious. We're being so professional in all of this, but you have to have a personality, and the personality has to show. And I think if we went back to that person you thought of who has executive presence, if you know them, I'll bet they have a fantastic personality. So sure, we have to smile, but you're right. You don't want to be sitting in the meeting the whole time smiling. Then people are going to have some questions about what you're thinking and what your goals are. All of this there's only so much in anything that we talk about today or that I recommend. You don't want to go too far, really with anything. There was a great point, and I'm missing who said it, but Mark, if you videotape yourself speaking and watch it in fast forward, it really amplifies your nonverbal cues. That's a great trick. And the other trick to do is just turn off the audio after you videotape yourself. When I've coached, it's been years since I coached anchors and reporters, but TV anchors, you'd go into the video booth with them, and they would put the tape of the newscast in, and they'd hit play, and I would immediately turn down the sound. Well, they would immediately jump up and turn it back on, and I'd say, no, I don't want to hear the sound. I just want to see you non-verbally. And that's a great way to see what you do non-verbally. And many of them just hadn't thought about that, and they had sort of that deer in the headlights stare at the teleprompter look. And once they realized that non-verbal was a huge part of what they did, then suddenly we saw eyebrows, the smile in the appropriate time, the shoulder move, the lean in, just like we do when we normally, communicate. Kathleen, great comment. The key is authenticity. It is not a performance. Boy, yes, absolutely. This isn't about acting at all. This is about communicating, right? It's doing those things we talked about earlier. It's engaging with another person. Great communicators, every dialogue, both people win. Both people walk away saying, that was a great interaction, and now I can move forward and I'm in a better place. So yes, absolutely, that's a great comment. It all is about authenticity. Let's talk a little bit about substance. Speaking of authenticity, you can be the greatest communicator in the world, but if you don't know what you're talking about, then forget it, right? We have to be aware, fully aware of what we do, and you should be the expert. Are you the go-to person? Do you know literally everything there is to know about your job, your field, your organization? Are you up to date? Are you well read? I like to call it the gut. I love to work with people who have the gut. They just know it. It's in there. It was like they were almost born with it, and they were born to do that job and work in that industry. That's substance. And when you have that kind of knowledge, it is amazing what it does for your confidence. And half the time, we're not even aware of it. but we know what we're talking about. So, and we usually, it leads to passion too. So we love our field. And whether we mean to or not, it comes out and other people see it, either in our confidence, the way we look at people, the way we carry ourselves. And that's huge, especially for leaders, is to have that knowledge, that substance, because it does lead to confidence. Now, look at the bottom bullet point, choosing your moments. Nobody likes the know-it-all, so we don't want to be the person in the room that always has the answer. It's not really about that. It's more about understanding your field, really getting it, and people know, people see it. That's that substance, and it comes across in your presence. I'm just looking at some of the questions.
I think
wow, this is a great.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's great. In the conference over the phone, what is a polite way to interrupt another person to make sure your point is being considered? I'd love to know what the audience thinks about that. What do you do when you're on a conference call and you need to interrupt? Boy, there's so many ways to go with that, especially if you've got a conversation hog, someone who's really got an agenda and they're trying to just own the floor, right? Yeah, Debbie, I agree. Getting the floor on a conference call can be challenging. It's actually what Eliza and I talked about the other day. It's choosing those moments and thinking ahead. What's really key? Not going into a conference call cold. Like, we shouldn't go into meetings cold, but we often do. But really thinking about that call. What's the call about? Is there an agenda? Let me see it. What do I want to accomplish and contribute to this meeting? And just sticking to your guns and try to get it in there. I think Eliza McDevitt has a great idea. Just start by saying something positive about what the speaker's saying, and then go into your point. In other words, that's a great point, John, and then moving on. That's excellent. Jeffrey, that's brilliant. On a conference call, you have to remember, there's that second delay there before the speaker's mic cuts out. And that's why sometimes interruptions are so difficult. I think of calling my mom. She's 90 on the cell phone, right? I have to wait because whatever it is, the phone we got her, there's a little delay on there. And it's just like a conference call. We have to be careful. Excellent comment. Clear ground rules at the start of a conference call is really smart. And we should have those in every meeting. What's the goal of this? And what are our ground rules, such as no cells, make sure you're muting, don't be doing other work while you're on, and so forth. But as Annabelle said, be prepared. That's the way to really do it in those meetings, being prepared. So that's substance. So we talked about communication and substance as two of the elements of executive presence. Number 3 is appearance. And I think when you read that or you see that, many people start to think, oh, I have to be drop dead gorgeous or tall, dark, and handsome. No, it's not about how tall you are, what you weigh, what you look like. It's more about looking the part. If you work in construction, do you look like a construction worker? If you're a professor, do you look like the type of person you think you dress like a professor? If you're a sales professional, do you dress in that manner? It's about appropriate dress. I wear a coat and tie to work every day because I'm at a university. But if I went out to a farm, excuse me, for example, I probably would take the coat and tie off because it certainly just it's not appropriate. And so when we think of appearance, number 1 is appropriate. And appearance is important because oftentimes that drives that first impression. And we all know how difficult it is to overcome that first impression. And if our appearance isn't quite there, that's a tough hurdle to overcome. A lot of our MBA students ask about dress and appearance. And of course, MBA students don't have money. And so they say, what do I do? What do I buy? And I usually tell them I would probably stay away from the buy 1, get 10 free kind of sales and try to invest in some clothing that is of high quality, but that really fits. I've seen people of all shapes and sizes look absolutely fantastic when their clothing fits, when they have a right a tailor or seamstress or somebody to help them really look good. And that appearance does say then, I care. I'm just looking at some of the comments. Yeah, right. If you're rocket science, you wear a lab coat. Exactly. That's a great way to say it. And as Jeffrey just said, the tailor is the best investment in your wardrobe. Definitely for men, absolutely. I remember when I was younger and I found out what a tailored suit cost. I couldn't breathe for a while. And then I realized, but wow, what an investment. And that's certainly what we tell our MBA students, if you can. It's worth investing in your appearance. So communication, substance, appearance, and people with executive presence also have poise, don't they? They just seem to be the one who has that calm, professional demeanor, that individual that just seems to have it under control. And as a student and teacher of communication, I love to people watch and just see, especially in professional settings, the vibe that others give and the messages that I receive, even though they're not purposely sending them. And some leaders, and I think our president, Reevely, sends this message of, I got it. Everything's under control. Don't worry about it. You just go about your business and I'll take care of all this. And what a great feeling that is as someone who follows that leader. It's really, really helpful. Another interesting question. Is there anything to the concept of having a signature or power color? Wow. I'm interested in what you think on that. Is there anything to the concept of having a signature or power color? I can't speak to women's clothing as much as I can to men's. And men's clothing, at least professional clothing, there seem to be no rules anymore. When I was younger, if it was a striped suit, that meant a club tie with a solid shirt. There was a rule there. Now you look and we'll see people with a striped suit, striped shirt, striped tie. But if the colors seem to go, it works. And not to mention the pocket square and everything else they've got going. So, and this question sort of reminds me a little bit of a discussion we had the other day. And again, pointing back to Eliza, who brought this up, is there ever too much in terms of appearance? Can you go overboard with what you're wearing? So people might have the perception of, is that all style and not enough substance? Just something to sort of thinking about. Yeah, but I don't have an answer for that. But if you do, is there anything to the concept of having a signature or power color? Please type it in. Let us know what you think. Back to poise, right? That calm, professional demeanor. People want to follow those who remain poised. My first boss in higher education was the university president for 25 years, and I never saw him lose his temper. And I just, what's the trick? And he said, I can't. I'm the leader. I can't. If I lose it, regardless of the situation, what signal does that send to everybody else on the team? Amazing to me. Just jump back to the question about the power color. Jeffrey Johnson, that's the answer. That's excellent. Pay attention when you get compliments. If you're wearing something green and someone says, you look fantastic today, you'll hear about it if it works, and follow that lead. I think that's a great way to go with it. And don't forget also when someone compliments you to say thank you. We all tend to have a tendency to say, oh, this old suit, or oh, this old blouse. But yeah, let's accept the compliment. So the fifth element to executive presence is surroundings. And this is a little different than the other four. Basically what we're talking about is if you have an office, or if it's your cubicle, your conference room, making sure that that's sending the right signals, because your surroundings do say something about you. And is your office stacked to the ceiling with papers? I'm not sure what it says, but it does say something, and people will read different things into that versus an office that looks like there's no work going on, right? There's no right or wrong answer. It's just being aware of that. One area that I think people tend to forget about is your Skype background. And companies have put some real thought into, if they use telepresence or some other video conferencing, of what the background looks like. And we need to do that. You need to do that when you're Skyping, especially in a professional setting. Really look at that shot. How do you look on camera? If you're working out of your kitchen, so to speak, and you're a consultant, hopefully we don't see the refrigerator in the background. or the dog's not barking. You know, we've all been there. You want it to be as professional as possible. One of the things I recommend for Skype is making sure there's enough lighting, check the background, and make sure that the camera is at eye level. Because if the camera is up and you have to look up, that's a bit of a submissive shot. You'll look submissive. And it's just the other way. If you're looking down, you give this authoritative type look that may be inappropriate in that particular instance. But Skype background's so important. I've seen people, you can barely see them. It doesn't look good. I would invest in what's behind you and invest in a decent camera as well. But those other little details that surround you. Yeah, like Justin said, you look at all law firms, they're always sitting in front of a case of law books. Yep, they do that. They do that. Oh, that's great. Kate, we interview people via webcam from their home offices, and often the background influences how we perceive the person. Sure. And we understand people work from home. I have a friend a good friend who does, and it seems every time we Skype, whatever it is, his dog begins to bark. It's just, it's us. We're friends, but imagine that in a professional setting. You just probably want to just die if that happens. So you have to be very careful with your surroundings. So again, those are the 5 points of executive presence. But we spend a lot of time on communication because that is the priority. Think again of those people in your circle who communicate. They catch the breaks. They get the promotions. They get the clients. They make the sales. Communication is huge today, and every one of us can improve. And rather than shoot for, I'm going to be the next Oprah Winfrey, what I always tell people is consider communication like a ladder. Just get to the next rung. And then when you do that, go up the next. And I think so many people mention Toastmasters. It's a great way because that's practice in front of people. Once you get over that fear, communication is really fun. It's a great thing to pursue. And then, of course, substance, we talked about knowing it, getting it, being the expert. Poise, being calm and cool, and, of course, your surroundings as well. So that's my spiel. I'm going to keep looking at some of the comments. If you have any questions, any comments, please feel free to type them in. I'm trying to read and talk at the same time, and I'm not very good at that.
I'm just going to jump in, Ken. This is Eliza again. I think very early on in the comments, somebody quoted back what you said, and that is that communication is the currency of today's business. And I think that kind of nicely summarizes what you've been saying and how important it is, because the ability to communicate your ideas clearly and be heard it's just critical. So, yes, I thank you so much for doing this. And people, as you type in other questions, we'll stay on for a little bit. But as a reminder, we will send the entire webinar out to all of you who've registered, and keep the conversation going if you keep asking us questions.
Yeah, and please, if you're into communication, that's what I tweet about each day. You know how we all go and turn on our computers in the morning. We all have our news feeds. I'm always scouring the internet for communication articles and good tips, so I post those. Please feel free to follow-up questions to email or to post them right up on Twitter if you're into Twitter. But yeah, thank you very much for being with us today. This was really fun, and I appreciate you being on. As Eliza said, we had a huge group today, and it was great. So Eliza, thank you for putting.
Well, and this is Eliza, because I have to call out another Eliza. She just asked, who can the quote about communication is the currency of today's business be attributed to? And I don't know whether that's you or someone else.
I've
heard it before.
It's one of those things that I see on Twitter often, and I've just adopted it. I've never seen it attributed to anyone. There's another one that I see all the time concerning presentations, and it's an acronym, STAR. If you're going to give a presentation, remember STAR, something they'll always remember. And I love that one too. And just don't give a presentation. Make sure you're giving them something they'll always remember. And yeah, and I think I'm afraid in the world of social media, sometimes we're unable to attribute great lines and great thoughts to the person who actually created it. And I don't know where that came from.
I'm just going to throw one more thing in, too. When you were talking about leadership qualities and remaining calm, I'm going to paraphrase the quote because I don't remember it, but somebody I used to work with said, a true leader exudes calm, sets a vision, and removes barriers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there you go. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, everybody. Would love to have your feedback. We're delighted so many of you joined us today over your lunch break, and thank you so much, Ken. This has been fantastic. I'm very excited, and we look forward to engaging with all of you again when we do the next webinar. Hopefully, it will be one of our new marketing professors talking about Pitch Perfect, which I think will be another career professional development webinar. So thank you so much. And Ken and those behind the scenes who have been so supportive of this program, Karen and Mike, those of you on this webinar don't see them, but they're sitting here making us look good and making me appear competent. So thank you all.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us today.